Hello, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you may be in the world, but predominantly Australasia. A warm welcome to the July 2022 edition of Law Chat, sponsored as always by Moore Markhams, accountants and business advisors specialising in offering financial services to the legal profession. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Terri Mottershead, who is the Executive Director for the Centre for Legal Innovation, and she joins us today from Australia. Terri, a warm welcome to you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, Simon.
Well, thank you for coming on. For those who may not be familiar with the Centre for Legal Innovation, could you tell us a little bit perhaps about what the centre does and what your background is? Because I know you've spent time overseas, particularly in North America, as part of your career.
Misspent youth, Simon, but yeah, I'll start with the centre, and thanks for the opportunity to chat about it. The centre is part of the College of Law, which I think will be known pretty well to folks in this part of the world. So we're a business unit of the College of Law, but our focus is really as a think tank. So we monitor, analyse what's happening in the legal marketplace, the trends, and then really the work of the centre is focused on translating those trends into bite-sized practical action steps that people can actually use in practice. So no matter what the size of your practice, and also however you're involved with practice. So our focus is very much on lawyers and all of those wonderful allied professionals that we're going to be talking probably a little bit more about today. So that's really what we do. We disseminate that information in a bunch of different ways. So it might be a round table, might be through an incubator program, might be through our lab programs, but kind of different ways for people to be able to consume content and create community, really. My background to that is I'm a recovering lawyer. I practiced in Australia and Hong Kong for a long time, and then really combined a love of practice in the law with teaching. So I moved into being a pracademic versus an academic, and worked in Asia and also in the United States, and then morphed that again with that kind of education learning vibe, I guess, into leading professional development and talent management departments for global legal law firm associations and in-house in law firms as well. And I guess it kind of came full circle, all of that, with the role that I'm doing now. So love thinking about innovation, love thinking about how we can deliver our legal services and products better, cheaper and faster. And here I am.
Terrific. Well, that's great. And this session today was called Reshaping, Redefining and Reinventing Legal Practice. And of course, there are a lot of trends that are actually helping to do that. I wonder if you might share with us, if you can, briefly, what some of those trends that you have been looking at, how they're shaping. Perhaps you could start with a topical one, and that's been the impact of COVID on legal practice as you see it.
Absolutely. I mean, look, I see four big trends, and the impact of COVID really factors into all of them, but I guess particularly one of them. So I'll kind of throw them out first, and then we can explore them as you would like to. But I call them the next big four. And to me, that's kind of one of them is legal tech and AI. You can't go anywhere without talking about that. And I throw into that as well data, just the use and application of data, because they often go hand in hand. The second one to me is the focus or refocus or a different focus on client experience or user experience, those kind of legal design thinking principles that are being applied across the board now. And that kind of morphs into also employee experience. So that kind of big focus on design, empathy, thinking about how the user uses and consumes our services and products. The third one for me is work, and all of these are not disconnected, just really the changing nature of lawyer work and how that is kind of has supported but is also expanding into the new law careers that are the topic of the discussion today. And then, of course, the last one is people. How are we finding those capabilities and competencies to be able to deliver in a very different legal world? So to go back to your question in particular, Simon, I guess one of the biggest things that we've seen in terms of changing culture and the way that we work has been spurred on by our use of technology and increasingly our use of data. I think that what we've seen as a direct result of COVID, and of course, particularly folks working from home versus in the office, or now a bit of a hybrid, is really the application and use of technology across the board, and particularly in products that we already have. So we did, to use a cliched term now, I guess, we have learnt to love the tech we're with and actually use it. So I think that's been the big one. And culturally, I think we're kind of redefining culture now, and particularly being driven by how do we retain culture when we are working in a hybrid environment. So kind of a long answer to the question, but I wanted to pull out those trends and then kind of speak to the question directly.
So do I take it that in a way you would see COVID as having had a positive impact on the legal services industry and legal practice generally?
I do. I think unfortunately for us in legal practice, we've been one of the last to really embrace technology in how we work. And so it's kind of raised the level to a fundamental level of using tech. But where we've gone from there, I would say, is much more patchy. So how much we've then applied it or really sought to leverage that, and to use how we've changed, not just in technology, but challenging basically every way we deliver legal services and products. It is a bit patchy. It's not consistent.
So let me ask this, that when one talks about tech, of course, there's enough material there for an entire conference. We're not just talking about simply using Zoom to facilitate client meetings. You talked about, the use briefly of AI as well, and the extent to which that's being applied.
Yeah.
My understanding is that the use of AI is very much being engaged by many of the larger firms rather than the small provincial or rural firms. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's where the investment is. Although there's obviously access to, I guess, fairly narrow AI in a way, using tools like no code tools to do things like improve the automation of your services. That's certainly available. It's very affordable, no matter what the size of your practice. But how you're using that and applying it, I guess, in more complex ways within your firm, and how or if you're actually using your knowledge of that to even create consultancy services about this within your firm, tends to be more focused in the larger end of the market versus the smaller end of the market.
And are there any particular examples that you might share whereby you've seen AI or the broader use of technology being applied to save time or get better results for clients or improve service?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that we're seeing it a lot, again, kind of more on that automation side, but we're seeing it a lot when you visit a website of just about any law firm these days, that the first contact that clients are going to have is with some sort of tool that's asking them to complete some basic information about their matter. So, basically an intake tool. Or we might see in particularly the specialist or boutique practices or mid-tier practices, we might see that go a little bit further. So you might use a tool like that, but in this case, it's going to give you some basic information about the nature of the matter that you're focusing on. So it might be an employment law inquiry, it might be a family law inquiry, and that also helps to refine what your question or your problem is when you actually start to get to a lawyer. Or it may give you enough information at that point in time for you to go away and basically not have to come back. So I think we're seeing that. But then we're also seeing, depending on the practice area, we're also seeing just enormous, amazing uses of technology and AI now in things like e-discovery, which is an industry in and of itself, as you know. So certainly seeing some tremendous things there. But we're also seeing, technology being used and the data that it produces in things like contract lifecycle management, There's an enormous amount of money being invested in that area at the moment, or aspects of that. So pieces of it, point solutions, or in a way, all of those solutions coming together in a platform.
Are there any downsides to the uptake in technology? I mean, for example, Richard Susskind predicted in a number of books that it might lead to the marginalization of a number of low-level jobs. But at the same time, he suggested in his book that it would lead to the creation of new roles in legal firms. Is that something that is becoming a reality?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if there's anything that's commoditized or routinized, you're going to increasingly see that stripped out of the day-to-day work that particularly lawyers are doing. And a lot of that will give over to tech solutions, or it will be tech solutions accompanied by paralegals that can kind of provide the necessary support there. But I don't actually see that as negative, because to be honest, I don't think that's where lawyers or other specialists added their value in the first place. It's giving more time for lawyers to be able to spend time where they add, to my mind, the most value, on complex problem solving, on spending time and building relationships with their clients, understanding their business or their matter, and really using their experience to be able to come up with the best solution. So, I mean, I see that all as positive, but if your entire practice is built around a routinized delivery of legal services and products, you've got to think about that very differently now.
Yeah, absolutely. The second trend you referred to, though, was the increasing focus on client experience and, the design principles around service delivery and so on.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Absolutely. I think this is probably one of the most exciting areas, actually. And I think that for me, everything starts and ends with the client in a way. So for me, it's thinking about what your client's journey is from the time they're trying to find you to get the advice or information that they need, all the way through to how you stay in contact with them and what that looks like. So it's that search engine, or it's that platform where they can go and find you in the first place. It's that initial contact that we just spoke about with your firm. But it's also, once they've made contact with you, hopefully promptly, it's how you're conducting their matter. Are you bringing in the specialists that are needed, or are you thinking about their matter holistically, or are you thinking about it just in terms of the legal matters? And then are you up to date with all of the different ways that the law is now unfolding, anywhere from payment, perhaps via Bitcoin, to understanding how smart contracts work, and then staying in contact, a very focused, customized, relevant way of staying in contact with them, the sort of matter that they've consulted you with. So I think it really does start and end with understanding that journey, but understanding it, and this is the critical part, from the client's perspective, not the lawyer's perspective, and that it's all focused on bringing the law to the client and not the client to the law.
And what do you think is driving that trend? Because obviously for many years, people said the pendulum was in favor of the lawyer, whereas now the pendulum seems to have swung in favor of the client. And as Jordan Furlong would say, law is now a buyer's market.
Yeah.
What has accelerated that trend, do you think?
Definitely choice. There's a lot more. We used to think law used to be really a duopoly. It was law firms and it was in-house legal departments. But now we've got to increasingly look at what was alternative legal service providers, not so alternative now because they're mainstream. But I think thinking about what services and products they are offering, and that they're offered very often, I guess, cheaper and faster because those platforms and those providers are relying very significantly on tech to be able to deliver those services. So there's more choices. I think that the other thing that you referred to Richard Susskind before, but the other thing that he predicted and has now come true is that when you look at any legal matter, it doesn't matter what sort it is, you can chunk it into segments. And the question that our clients are increasingly asked is, does that segment have to be done by a lawyer, or can it be done by somebody else? And can it be done better, cheaper, and faster, to go back to that trilogy again. So I think that choice is a big one. I think that clients are becoming more sophisticated because there's more information available. And I think actually also, to go back to your earlier question, Simon, COVID, because people got very used to the convenience of being able to have something as simple as an e-signature done rather than a wet signature, or being able to go to court and do that via video. They've seen a difference and they're reluctant to give that convenience up. And frankly, we're not being compared just with other lawyers. We're being compared with the services that are delivered by every other industry. So if I can, basically teleconference with my doctor and get my script sent via some service to a pharmacy and delivered to me, I want my legal services basically packaged exactly the same way.
Absolutely. And I'll just intervene here briefly and just say, for those participants who may be watching this, if they have got a question for Terri as we go through, feel free to use the chat button on your screen there. But carrying on, Terri, the third trend that you mentioned there was the issue of work, the changing nature of work. And of course, we all realize how COVID shook that up for lots of people. Do you want to expand on that particular trend?
Yeah, absolutely. It kind of falls into, I guess, the category of what work we're doing and how we're working. And so I'm going to flip those or reverse them. The how we're working, I think, has been very well documented in terms of now working from home and how much that has changed the workplace. And to go back to your earlier question, again, that the culture of the workplace, I think. But there's also, what work are we doing? So the more work that can be stripped out in the way that we've spoken about, automated in the way that we were speaking about earlier, then it's kind of reducing the work that only lawyers can do. Some of that work, as we've spoken about, also is going to alternative legal service providers and others. So the nature of the work, to my mind, we used to think about the work that lawyers did and it was really large, and it's kind of shrinking. So the outer circle is now being done by a whole bunch of different people or digital resources. And what lawyers actually have to focus on is becoming smaller and smaller. And so I think it's the nature of the work that we're doing, but also some really critical questions for lawyers, particularly now, which is how do we define the value that we add, and what is the value that we actually add in practice? So I think the nature of the work has changed, but also the questions that we have to ask ourselves about where do we add value for our clients as a result of the work that's left, if you like, for lawyers to do, is also a really critical question to ask and answer.
Absolutely, and I suppose that really ties in with the fourth trend as well, and that's the people, the makeup of the legal services industry. And I think it's fair to say it's not just lawyers, but it's legal professionals. So people with backgrounds in marketing, business development, IT, people management, training and development, and so on. And there's a whole raft of them. How do you see that as developing as a trend?
I think that we are in the midst. We're at a tipping point in terms of redefining the work that lawyers do, and then looking, if you like, in a broad sense at the legal services and products that a law firm, let me stick with law firms for a second, in particular offer. Some of those legal services and products don't require a lawyer, and in fact, arguably, some of the allied professionals or specialists that we spoke about are actually able to deliver those services better, cheaper, and faster than lawyers. And others do require someone with a law degree and someone really exercising particularly their experience as a lawyer in terms of being able to do that work. So I think what it comes down to now is for law firms to really look at the clients that they've got, the nature of the work that they do, ask themselves the question, who can do this work better? And how do we create that coalition of professionals, if you like, what we've referred to in the past as a multidisciplinary workforce, to be able to best deliver that service? What are the capabilities and skills mix that we need in order to be able to do that? And I think if we ask and answer that question today, we actually don't come up with the answer being, let's get a bunch more lawyers. We come up with the answer to that being, let's bring on board, or at least have access to, the services and the specialisms around things like legal technology and its application, data analysis, efficiency within our operations, so legal ops professionals. Have we learnt things that allow us to, for example, now add an additional revenue stream to our business that looks more like a consulting service? And so that list goes on. But I think it's a shake-up. It's putting all the pieces almost in a jar, shaking them up, seeing what they are, and seeing who does those best and how we recombine to offer those through our firm or legal organisation.
And tell me, have you seen in the last, say, 10 years, 15 years maybe, a growth in the executivization of particularly law firms? In other words, the suite of chief this, chief that, operating officer, executive officer. I mean, in the old days, they would talk about a partnership secretary, and then we had practice managers, office managers, and now, depending on the size of the firm, we have some people with very sophisticated business backgrounds running the firm as a business. Do you see that as a trend that's set to grow?
Yeah, definitely, and has definitely been growing and changing over that time. And I think where it used to be a lawyer who had gone on to do or had an interest in management, that's certainly still possible and true. But I think increasingly we're seeing folks that are being drawn by from industries outside legal and brought in, and I think that trend will continue. And part of it is it goes back to what we were saying earlier, which is the changes in the industry itself. But kind of hand in hand with that is needing to have capabilities that have seen and looked at things quite different.
Well, my question is this, that obviously the mix of people in firms is changing, as we are seeing. Roles are changing and evolving. And some would say the partnership model has changed and is evolving as well. But my question is really, what are the implications, therefore, for leadership of, if we're talking about law firms? Because traditionally, of course, we had this partnership model, which was often made up of a reluctant leader and autonomous partners doing their own things, whereas now we end up with an entity which is much more looking like a business with some high-powered people who happen to be the shareholders working in it, and we call them partners or directors. So what are the implications for how these organizations are led?
I think that the way that you've classified it is accurate. I think law firms are becoming increasingly corporate, and that's true in terms of how they will be run, as in run like a business. Whether you're a large firm or whether you're a small firm, it's going to be exactly the same implications. The question is that you may decide to have others do the management part of the business if you're a mid-sized firm or larger, or you've gone out of practice, because that used to be the other thing. You'd be practicing at the same time as managing a law firm in the past. You've gone out of practice completely and really skilled yourself up in the management and leadership of the firm. So I think it is going to be much more corporate. I think you're going to have people increasingly, and already are, dedicated to management and nothing else. It changes the nature of ownership, determination, I guess. The more corporate you become, then the less you can have the one or two partners that don't want to do things, holding out and basically constantly seeking that consensus. It's going to be much more corporate versus shareholder relationship, I think, than there has been in the past. But I do see that actually increasing. On the plus side, if you're not interested in management and you really want to get on and do your work as a lawyer, then you have the ability to be able to focus pretty much solely on that. But I think right now, as we sit here right now, we haven't reached that perfect understanding or balance of how that's going to work. I think it's almost being worked out on a firm by firm basis as to how that responsibility, if you like, is going to be managed, but also the comfort level of the owners in the business changing from being used to having a bigger say to basically working more within that environment. But I do see that environment continuing to change.
Leading on from that, do you think that private practices have a rosy future? Because we've seen a huge growth in the number of lawyers now working as in-house counsel. Do you think that growth has come about as a result of some of these trends?
I think it has, because I think that folks that are going into practice now are not finding the sorts of practices that they want to work in available, or at least not available in the numbers that are necessary for people to be able to join them. So I think a bunch of things are happening. People are going out and starting their new practices, what we've called the new law practices, that are run and operated quite differently, and very often the hallmarks of that are a flatter structure, so less hierarchy, dispensing with the billable hour, being much more democratic and open to new ideas and change. And there's a bunch of other ones, but there are a couple that I guess come up a lot. So we see people doing that. We see people looking at the other alternatives, and there's many of them now. Yes, going in-house is one of them, but also so too is working in a legal tech startup, being a founder of a legal tech startup yourself, or taking your law degree and with that knowledge deciding that you want to become one of these other allied professionals or specialists. So you want to become a legal data analyst, or you want to become a legal operations professional, or you want to become a legal technologist, or you want to go into the consulting arm or knowledge management, or whatever the case may be. So there's just a lot more options, a lot more things that you can do with a law degree. And it's really speaking to the law plus kind of interests of people that are exiting law school as well. So I love technology. Great. There's now options where I can use my law degree and apply that or combine it with something else. So I think it's a function of options as much as anything else, and many more of them, but also a function of wanting to work in a different sort of environment than we would have typically seen in a traditional law firm.
Yes. And I understand your work is pretty global. I know you're based in Australia, but from your experience, do you see any countries or any jurisdictions who are more ahead of the game than others?
Yeah, look, I think that's a great question, Simon. And I think that certainly from our experience and the folks that we speak to, because we're operating at multiple speeds of transformation at the moment. There are some areas within a country that is operating faster than other areas in a country. Again, it's patchy. So I would say in terms of our part of the world, we're changing and transforming at the same speed as everyone else. We're not behind the curve. We may even be a little ahead of the curve, frankly. And maybe that's a function of the number of law firms in a country and just the extent, the depth and breadth of change that has to take place. But there's leaders in every country. There's followers in every country. And the vast majority are in the middle trying to work out how this transformation, how they can do it, because it's a massive change exercise, how they can do it effectively, but and also applying all of the principles that they can of change management to get it done. So I think it's consistent in its difference and patchiness across the world, if that's helpful, and it may not be.
It is very helpful. And this discussion has been very stimulating, and thank you for putting all these numerous trends into such a cogently presented précis, if you like, because there are so many things happening. It's such a dynamic industry, and it really has been a pleasure to share your insights on Law Chat today. My apologies to you and to those who were watching live. They'll probably get to see the recording of this for the power outage. First time that's ever happened on Law Chat, but hopefully it'll be the last too. But for now, Terri, thank you very much for joining us on Law Chat, and until next time, look after yourself and keep up the good work.
Thank you, Simon. An absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.